Ottawa woke up to icy sidewalks and power crews. Washington woke up to shifting trade numbers. And up north, the Prime Minister is set to talk Arctic defense. And later in the brief, I'll tell you what one Canadiens goalie's night in Ottawa could mean for the Senators down the stretch. Today in Ottawa, cloudy and cold, around -2 degrees Celsius. Freezing rain is still the headline close to home after a midweek storm that shut schools, snarled travel, and knocked out power across parts of Ottawa, Gatineau, and the Valley. In Western Quebec, the big lingering issue has been restoration in smaller communities, where some residents were told they could be waiting into Friday. In Gatineau, a brief outage at the water treatment plant triggered a pressure drop and a precautionary boil water advisory, affecting roughly 77,000 residents. The city's guidance has been simple: boil water for 1 minute until the advisory is lifted, and use the community center supports, like bottled water and charging if you need them. And a quick reset on what to watch this afternoon. With temperatures dipping, any standing water from melt or mixed precipitation can refreeze fast, so even if main roads look fine, side streets and walkways can surprise you. Turning now to the bigger thread that ties Ottawa to what's happening in Washington: trade and the uncertainty businesses are trying to plan around. The U.S. trade deficit narrowed in January, more than analysts expected. That came from two moving parts. Exports were up and imports were down, with reduced petroleum imports mentioned as a contributor. The goods deficit improved, and the U.S. services surplus helped offset some of the shortfall. Here's the key point: even a better trade month can still be a drag on economic growth, depending on what's driving it and how the next couple of months look. Economists also caution that monthly trade numbers swing around. Inventory decisions, seasonal patterns, and one-off shipments can all distort the picture, so 1 month doesn't confirm a trend. Why this matters locally: a lot of Ottawa area jobs and contracts sit somewhere in the ecosystem of cross-border trade, whether that's tech services, logistics, or federally regulated procurement. And the mood of the Canada-US relationship often shows up first as hesitation. Delayed orders, paused hiring, slower investment decisions. And that brings us to the political deadline now looming: the mandatory July 1st review of the Canada-US-Mexico Trade Agreement, CUSMA. The U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, says Washington wants to renew the pact, but is facing resistance from Canada. The friction points being cited include long-standing Canadian domestic pressures, especially around supply management and dairy protections. The U.S. is signaling impatience about timelines, while talks remain unresolved. The risk here isn't that trade stops overnight. It's that uncertainty can start acting like a tax. Companies hold back because they don't know what the rules will look like by midsummer or whether new conditions could be attached. A mid-brief note to connect the dots: keep the January trade data in mind as these negotiations continue, because if U.S. policymakers start emphasizing trade imbalances and domestic production, that can harden positions at the negotiating table, even if the month-to-month numbers are noisy. Two quick national security items to round out the context. Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Yellowknife, expected to announce plans tied to defending and transforming Canada's North and Arctic regions, then travel to Norway to observe Arctic military exercises. The timeline matters here because Arctic policy tends to move in multi-year procurement cycles, but announcements often signal where money and attention will go next. Separately, National Defense says Canada is restricting how naval intelligence from Operation Caribou can be shared, so it isn't passed to U.S. forces involved in a separate anti-drone campaign in the Caribbean that has conducted lethal airstrikes on suspected drone boats. The practical takeaway: Canada says it will keep cooperating on maritime interdiction, but with tighter guardrails on how Canadian-gathered information can be used. Now, back home, sports and the promised payoff. The Senators dropped a tight one to Montreal, 3-2, and the story was the Canadiens' 21-year-old goalie, Jacob Fowler, recalled from the AHL and thrown into a high-intensity game in Ottawa. He stopped 32 shots, and Canadiens coach Martin St. Louis openly acknowledged it creates tougher goaltending decisions as Montreal pushes for a playoff spot. What it means for Ottawa: in games that feel like 4-point swings, a hot opposing goalie can erase stretches where the Senators are doing a lot right. The final piece to watch is how Ottawa responds in the next matchup. Do they create more second chances at the net? And can they avoid letting one stolen game turn into a short slide? As the region clears the last of the storm impacts, the bigger clock is now July 1st, CUSMA's review, because markets and hiring decisions tend to move before the deadline, not after. That's the thread to keep an eye on. I'm Ivy, and that's your Daily News Bite for Friday, March 13th.